galaxies in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites, the green and insignificant planet, is now dead.
Welcome to Verse the World with Matt and Caleb. I'm Caleb.
I'm Matt.
So this is a show where every week we try to have a guest on and kind of openly discuss a subject that we're interested in, that maybe we're not like completely well versed in, but we kind of want to know more about and just kind of hash it out with somebody. Last week and this week we don't have a guest. We're still trying to get scheduling figured out and get our legs under us, but we'll have somebody most likely next week. And so basically the goal of this podcast is just to have an environment where people can talk about really serious issues and have any opinion that they want to have and discuss it. Like, no matter how like weird or extreme it is, we're open to discussing it with you and hearing like your side of the opinion, because I think me and Matt are both of the same opinion that you can't learn if you don't expose yourself to new ideas. So that's the show, and like we usually do, we're going to start it off with just kind of some interesting things that we looked at or read this week that we wanted to discuss on here. Matt, you got one?
Yeah. We both watched this video I sent you, which it was sort of about protesting, because Dave Rubin, just to give a backstory on Dave Rubin's I think he used to be a comedian, and at one point he started sort of doing political commentary, and he has a show on YouTube, the Dave Rubin Report, and he basically just interviews people. It doesn't really matter what side of the aisle they're on or what their beliefs are. He just wants reasonable people to like sit down and have a conversation. He wants to understand the ideas, which is sort of that sort of thing is the type of thing that sort of inspires this podcast too.
Yeah, just we wanted to branch out beyond like politics to more like any type of issue, religion, social issues, science issues, whatever.
Yeah, and we don't want to just bring people on that agree with us either.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think has inspired him. But anyway, he's the most nice, reasonable guy like I can think of. I mean, he's kind of gets in the same circles of like Ben Shapiro and those type of guys. But Ben Shapiro, who I agree with on a lot of stuff, Ben Shapiro is still like a little cheeky and sort of can be a little bit of a jerk sometimes.
Can get aggressive sometimes.
Yeah, Dave Rubin is just the nicest guy. I mean, he's a firm guy in what he believes, but he's still like, he's just very reasonable, very open to discussion. And he was, I wish I could remember the college, but he's gonna do one of his speeches at some university, and
I think it might have been Toronto. I think it was in Canada, because they were making a lot of jokes about they ended up having to move the venue to a hockey rink.
Yeah.
It might not have been Canada though. I could be wrong, but
maybe so. But that did happen. They had to move it. But
yeah.
So anyway, which is ridiculous that there's all these issues, safety issues for like, some guy to come and talk. But
well, yeah, just in case people don't know, this is actually a big thing that's been going on a lot lately that maybe not everyone is aware of. There's like the last, maybe since like 2015 or so, there's been more and more like protests against anybody coming to talk about free speech. Like they've more and more, because that's what he was there to talk about, was kind of free speech.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it tends to be a lot of left-leaning people assuming that if the speaker's coming to discuss free speech that they're all right. And so there's been like huge protests all the time. Like Ben Shapiro gets shut out a lot, Milo Yiannopoulos, Jordan Peterson. Like these protesters will come in and kind of the college can't really do much about it, and they'll just like rant over the people or like shake a lot of bells and like pretty much prevent anyone from being able to hear until they basically run the event and no one's able to get a word in edgewise. So.
And it started off mostly conservative people, which is ironic, because I always say, like, I remember being a kid and coming from like a Christian household and stuff. but I remember being a kid, like, I always thought, it always seemed like the Christian conservative people were the ones that were like, oh, you can't say that on TV, or you can't talk about that. And it's just weird how it flips. But now it's like conservative, any conservative that comes to talk. But it's getting to the point where it's not even conservatives anymore. Mm-hmm. It's almost to the point where it's anyone reasonable coming to talk, which is ridiculous, but it really is.
Because Rubin's not... He was like a liberal left, wasn't he? And now he's like more center leaning.
When he started his show, which was only a couple years ago, he basically said, I'm a liberal, but I don't really like what a lot of people calling themselves liberal are doing in these areas, you know. But he basically, like, I mean, he's like, you know, pro-gay marriage. He is gay, actually, which I thought is the most interesting thing. And
I didn't know that until this video.
yeah, and he goes to talk at the college, and he says that, like, the first several when he actually tries to speak, like, as soon as he starts talking, there's this older, like, couple. I mean, it's a guy and a girl, I don't know, but they're just they just start chanting Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, just over and over again, which ironically is something that, like, I think he's one of the most reasonable, like, to discuss. He's not like oh, these are all idiots and Black Lives Matter and stuff. Like I said, Dave Rubin's like the most. He's a really nice guy, reasonable guy, and these guys just keep saying that over and over again. He's getting irritated.
And it was like they timed it or something. Like they were timing how long they were going to chant, and then everybody had like a time slot of when they were going to interrupt. It was really weird behavior.
Yeah, it was really just weird and disruptive. And the first, I mean, I'm sure he would have gotten to deeper topics, but the only thing that really seemed like was part of his regular speech, he kind of ended up having to just do some like improv stuff because he was irritated with the crowd and just talking about how protesters aren't really helping the cause. Which is sort of what I was going to talk about. Is he started talking? Oh, he was saying liberal stuff. He was like, "I'm a gay man. I believe in gay marriage. I'm married to a dude. I'm pro-choice." And it's funny because you have a lot of people. There's some people in the crowd with like MAGA hats on and stuff, and they're there to listen to this guy because even though he's kind of more liberal, he still believes in free speech. And at a certain point, it's like people from different stripes are all kind of having to like get together in this little group of like, we just want to be at least reasonable and be able to discuss and have the discussion. So there's all these people in the crowd that are like those people yelling, and I totally agree with what he was saying. It's like they're not helping their case at all. And it's really made me question what I think about protesting, because I think like protesting is sort of an American thing of free speech, of like drawing attention to something. Mm-hmm. But this was just straight up not allowing someone to speak.
It was just disruptive because like the like when they started chanting Black Lives Matter, that was the first of like about 10 different protests that happened within. Like he's there giving a speech and people in the crowd keep standing up and protesting different things, like on some kind of weird time schedule. But the first two people just started chanting Black Lives Matter with no context. He didn't reference black people at all, or talk about any social or like economic issues, anything that could relate to Black Lives Matter. They just stood up and started chanting it, and he was going to do a Q&A section at the end, and he said, "Hey, if you guys have something to say, we're doing a Q&A, we're happy to hear from you." And they just kept chanting, and he was like, "Okay, well, if you even want to just talk about it now because you're not bringing anything to the table, we'll get you a mic and just tell me what you disagree with that I'm saying, or what it is that you think that we disagree on. I'd love to hear what you have to say." And they would not, and then they eventually just sat down. It was like there was no point. Like they weren't trying to like bring a point. They were just trying to
just wanted to yell. And it really they're doing a very bad case of representing people who believe what they believe, because most of the time you don't even understand what they believe. It's such like an emotional outcry. And I'm okay with someone being emotional about something. Like, I can understand, like, you know, you come from, like, a predominantly black neighborhood and you're watching, like, family members get killed or something. And you know, whatever you believe about this, it's like, I can understand people being emotional about it. But you're not changing anyone's minds by just fueling all that emotion into yelling and screaming and everyone's racist and all this stuff. And that's what kept happening throughout the whole thing. Finally, one like, college-aged girl finally was like, okay, like she was yelling some stuff, and Dave Rubin's like, look, I just want to hear, like, I just want to discuss with you guys what's the actual issue here. And this girl finally stood up, and just from the start, she was so disrespectful.
A man was holding the mic to get her question, like that was his job, and she would not talk unless he handed her the mic. Like, she was upset that he was holding the mic for her.
And it didn't have anything to do with her specifically. That's what they do at these things.
Yeah.
People come up and they hold the mic.
Because what could go wrong is you could hand somebody the mic and then them not give it back, and you'd be unable to continue on with the event, which is what happened.
Yeah, and it was very, like, I mean, there was a certain point where some of the, like, whoever was, you know, doing the event came up and was like, hey, you know, we can get, like, security or police or whatever to take. And he's like, no, like, I want to hear these people say, like, he's here to give a speech to these people, you know, who came to hear him, and he is giving his time for these people in the audience to actually have a word in. No one, who's going to be that respectful, like, who's going to be, you know, that accommodating to someone who's acting this way. And the way she acts right off the bat, is just instantly, oh, he's gonna hold the mic and all this stuff, and she's
upset. She's upset before she's like even had an opportunity to be upset.
Yeah.
Like she's looking for anything to be upset about, and everything is automatically unfair. Also, the first two people who were chanting Black Lives Matter were two white people. Like it was, which made it even weirder because it was like, is this directly related to you? Like, I don't know. Like if it had been two black people standing up, they refused to talk and do anything and respond, but were chanting it. Like I could understand a little bit more because probably, like you're saying, maybe they actually come from a predominantly black neighborhood where they're witnessing these problems like in their daily lives. But with these two people, it was like, I don't even know what your situation is. I don't even know if you've ever had to deal with this issue. Why are you bringing it up here of all places? But
and by the way, even though I was pointing out like, oh, maybe someone has witnessed these things and like being understanding of that, my personal view is I don't really care for identity politics at all. I don't care like what color you are or what gender you are or whatever. Like I just want to hear your ideas, and that's what I'm agreeing or disagreeing with is your ideas. Yeah. So whoever you are as a person doesn't really matter to me. That's my actual personal belief, but I still try to be understanding in that. But with the Black Lives Matter thing, it also brings up a whole nother issue of like this guilty by association thing where obviously Dave Rubin is not far right like a lot of these other guys, but he's somehow lumped into this camp just because he's talked to them. Because as far as I know, I don't know Dave Rubin's... I
think he was in support of the Black Lives Matter.
I don't know that he liked the movement, but I did watch one interview with him with this libertarian guy, Larry Elder, and Larry Elder was like grilling him, and he was arguing with Larry Elder like, well, there is black people being shot and stuff. Like, he's definitely not, at least that I know of, far right of the issue, and he's not. If he is, he hasn't really said it. So it's sort of like this thing of like, oh, there's a conservative here, so I'm going to lump him in with this other group of people and lump him into these ideals. He's not even. Well, yeah, he's not even conservative.
He's not even conservative.
It's this weird thing of like, what are you trying to do here?
Yeah, it really was, and I hate to use the term because it's way overused, but it was kind of these people were straw manning him. And weren't even listening to what he had to say. He was very open to everything that they wanted to discuss, and was very accommodating to any of their views. But they assumed, some of them even assumed he was almost a white supremacist.
Oh yeah.
Automatically, and he's Jewish. And then anytime he would like correct them on any issue like that, they would then like insult. Like the college age lady was trying to use like Jewish slurs against him. She wasn't saying Jewish slurs, but she was like, oh, okay, and so you don't think that the people who said Jewish slurs and like are anti-Jewish are the people who end up killing Jewish people? Like they wouldn't listen to him once he would say something like, oh, I'm not a white supremacist, I'm Jewish actually, and then they without like even like being like, oh, I was wrong about that, or oh, okay, maybe I'm viewing you wrong, they would just try and find like another leg to stand on.
And they kept trying to say throughout the thing like, oh, you won't even answer the questions, but they kept bombarding him. He kept trying to have a discussion, and they just kept moving the
Yeah, because they'd ask like about a 5-10 minute question. They go, okay, well, let me answer this, and then they go, no, let me finish talking, and go on to something else. And eventually, like they wouldn't let him answer any of their questions, and then they go, okay, we've got to move on to somebody else. And he would take a long time. Like he was very accommodating. And then they'd be like, oh, why won't you answer my question? He goes, okay, just ask me a question and I'll answer it. And then if they didn't like his answers, they're like, you didn't answer my question. And he's like, I answered it very clearly.
The main argument he had with the girl, like the main argument that came out of the whole thing was he was talking about free speech, and she was trying to say that whole thing with the Jews. She's like, so you're okay with people like hating on Jews and stuff? And he's like, I'm not okay with it. I don't think it should be illegal. I don't think you should force people to say or not say anything.
Yeah, he was like, people have the right to do it. I wish that they wouldn't. But what I'm here to talk about is they have the right to, and we shouldn't allow government to decide what people have the right to say.
And I think she was trying to, which was interesting, but she was trying to correlate. She's like, if people are saying hateful things, there's a correlation to that and murdering people. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a comment. I don't usually comment on stuff, but I wrote a comment on YouTube, and I just said like about the whole, I dislike Jews or insult Jews, therefore I'm going to kill them or something. I said if someone was going to kill a Jew or whatever, I don't understand like I hate Jewish people or I call them all kinds of slurs and I make that clear. Mm-hmm. if the government makes that illegal, how is silencing someone verbally gonna, if they have it in their heart to try to kill a Jewish person for being Jewish, or a black person for being black? I don't understand why the government stopping you from being able to say hurtful things would stop someone from wanting to kill them if they were going to do that.
Yeah, and more likely we wouldn't know who to be watching in a sense if people weren't allowed to say things.
That's true. Yeah, we by doing that. I heard Bill Burr, the comedian, said at one time, he was saying when you have all these PC things that you can't say, he said, like, you're essentially creating a roadmap for actual bigots to get through. They're like, oh, if I don't say that and I don't say this, I can kind of weave my way through and get away with it, you know?
An interesting thing that came out of that, though, is he is somebody who was liberal when he started this a few years ago and has become more and more like center. I think he still says that he's still like left leaning on a lot of issues. Yeah. But another person was Jonathan. I think it's Jonathan Haidt. Haidt.
It sounds familiar.
I was listening to a speech he did back at the end of 2016 recently, and he was actually talking about how like he can't call himself a liberal anymore, even though it's kind of like feminism. Like he's like a first, second wave liberal, which stand for one thing. Like kind of 60s liberals stand for a much different thing than modern day liberals. And what he said was after like really looking into what the modern conservatives believe compared to what the modern liberals, he realized he's actually, even though he used to be conservative, without changing his views, he technically is now a conservative, just based on what the two sides stand for. And he's like, that's not how I see myself, but in a modern context, that's actually, I would have to call myself conservative, even though I'm a left-leaning liberal. And it's because the liberals have become like anti-liberal. Like you can't have diverse ideas, multiple different opinions, which is what liberalism used to stand for. You should be able to say any opinion, kind of. Now it's like you have a limited, like a type of opinion that you can have that's a very open opinion. And he's like, that just doesn't work. And he has about like a 2-hour lecture on it, and I'm summarizing like a whole conversation, but it's just interesting that a lot of people on the left are having to move from the left, not because they're really changing their views necessarily, but because the left is standing for something completely different than it used to. It's a really weird thing that's happening recently, which is fueling a lot of the left is eating itself like ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We should probably on our Facebook link, if you're watching this on Facebook, probably what we'll do is we'll link both of the videos we just talked about. So if you're interested, you can look into it more. What I wanted to discuss briefly this week was Elon Musk, because I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, and I'm a big fan of SpaceX, and I'm kind of a fan of Tesla. I don't know how much you know about Elon, but you know that he runs both of those companies.
I'm a pretty big fan of him, actually.
Okay, so this week, because basically I've been really like watching SpaceX close since they've really been talking about the long-term goal is creating a human base on Mars. I've just been like, I want to keep up with this. That sounds awesome. And he did a presentation last year, like a whole presentation of what they were going to do each year, what type of rocket they were trying to make, all this stuff. And it was like, man, that seems like a long time away. But he was saying, I think like 2025, like have an operational colony on Mars, but like start sending to people to Mars or like sooner than that. And the timetable keeps shifting depending on when they make breakthroughs and when they're like knocked back. But it's super interesting. But this week they launched their first Block 5 of the Falcon rocket, which the Falcon rocket is the one that they designed, that they've been using to launch satellites into space, to work with the ISS, those kinds of things. And this week they launched their like kind of final variant of it that will be the one that they'll reuse. As long as nothing goes wrong, they'll reuse the same rocket 10 times. And then they'll be able to refurbish it and then potentially use what's there about 100 times total before they have to like start over with new materials, which is the most reusable rocket ever made. And a lot of their previous rockets were reusable, but they weren't reusing them yet because they kept improving, and it would cost more to refurbish them and stall like the progress that they were making than to quickly move on to the next stage. So anyways, Block 5 is kind of their main one, and this one is like fully reusable. They had a successful launch with it, and you're aware now that like the Falcon rockets, the stage 1 that launches it into orbit actually returns and lands again.
No, I'm not too familiar
Dude.
with the SpaceX stuff, really.
You should check it out. It's pretty awesome. They perfected the technology. So you know how like the Apollo rockets, there'd be the whole main rocket, and it would launch, and then like when the first stage would drop off, like land in the ocean, the second stage would drop off, land in the ocean, the third stage would kind of go on.
Yeah.
I think there was 3 stages of those. The SpaceX, they now have it where it's the first stage will launch the whole thing into space, and then the rest will continue on. And that first stage like kind of re-enters the atmosphere, and then like propels itself back down into a vertical landing. So it's like it just lands back on a different platform, and then is just ready to be like hauled off, repaired, and then launched again.
That is awesome.
Dude, I'm gonna have to show you some stuff, because their goal is to also use space travel to decrease the amount of time it takes to get from continent to continent, instead of airplanes actually launching people like into like orbit and then down, so that you can go from like our Spain trip would take place in like an hour.
Whoa.
Yeah, like that's their goal, in order to create like enough of a market and enough funding so that they can eventually go to Mars. So anyways, like this is kind of a big step, because this rocket will be reused like multiple times, which is gonna dramatically reduce the cost of space travel. So that happened this week, which was super cool.
Yeah, I didn't know much. I mean, I knew about that, but I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of the date, just because Elon Musk has like a bad track record of like projecting dates that like miss the mark.
Yeah,
but
he's gotten better at it though. Like to an extent, like they're getting closer and closer, and they've actually revealed technology before they planned on.
Yeah,
releasing.
Well, and also the other thing is, it's better, I think, for him to like shoot, maybe be a little ambitious with the time frame and be a little wrong, than to be ambitious with the project and be wrong. Because he's just I've only really kept up with like the Tesla stuff and the Boring Company and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tesla, I really think it's a really cool thing, because now it's like, it used to be like electric cars were coming in and stuff, and especially like around where we live in like southern states and stuff, it's just the main thing holding it back was like, you know, I'm trying to see what I can get away with here, but that wussy car, I'll say that.
Oh, yeah,
There's
yeah,
like that kind of like, oh, you're a wuss, you're driving a, you know, all that stuff. Like, oh, you know, you want like some American muscle and all that stuff. But now you have like these cars that can go like 0 to 60 in like
2 seconds,
or whatever. So it's like you're like, it's like you're slowly eliminating any reason to not have an electric car in the future.
There's actually the Applebee's on 47th and Broadway in Wichita has an electric fill-up station.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's been there for about a year now, I think, and I didn't even know that.
That's the main thing, is like, if I got enough money, I mean, there's cars that I would like to have as like for the novelty I would have, but as far as like, this is a car I would actually buy, would be a Tesla. And they're really expensive, but the main thing is like, oh, where do you like charge up? Mm-hmm. And especially like around where we live, like, it took a while for like Uber to become a thing there, so it makes me wonder.
Yeah, because we're right in the middle of the United States, so like it seems like things take a while to get here. I think honestly, because the car that I have now is probably gonna last me like a handful of more years before I would ever have to change it. I was thinking about it recently. I really think my next car will probably be a Tesla. Yeah. Just because they'll probably they released a more market friendly model. I think it's called the Model 3, which is more like a
How much was it? That one's like
sedan.
90,000 or something?
That one's like 40,000, I think. Yeah. Like it's an affordable like mid-sized car.
That's something that's been going really fast, is how quick the price is dropping on those and stuff. Because I remember when I first looked into Teslas, I'm like, oh, I got to get in on this. When I first was hearing about them, must have only been a couple years ago, and it was like stock was like 120,000 or something. I'm like, man, that's like a house. I don't know when you would ever, you know, but that's
it's
cool.
Interesting because all of his different projects have been paying off, where like he created a new type of he put a lot of money into creating a new type of battery and creating what he called the Gigafactory. Yeah. And also using the solar energy that they're pushing with Tesla. Like, I don't know if you know about, like, we could go on and on about Elon Musk right now. Maybe we'll do an episode on it. But like, they have the solar paneling for your house now, where it's tiling, and it doesn't look that different, and that's reaching market now.
You know what,
It's
though?
as affordable as getting your house retiled.
I know, but you know what is annoying about that is I've heard people who have done that, and apparently because of how, depending on where you live, because of how many government regulations there are about what you can do with your house, it's a huge pain in the ass to actually do that.
Oh, really?
Which is so stupid.
Well, he's been fighting the government a lot recently, not fighting it, but he's actually went and met with Congress and stuff, trying to explain to them that part of the reason that renewable energy sources aren't becoming more mass marketed is because the U.S. economy is designed to unintentionally decentivize renewable energy and incentivize unintentionally fossil fuels, especially he was discussing the amount of carbon release, which I've always been against, a methane tax and that kind of stuff, a carbon emission tax. But what he's saying is you should measure the amount of damage done to the environment over time, which they're now able to map pretty damn accurately. And he's like, so you should factor that into the cost of fuel. There should be a certain amount of tax for that because it's something that you're doing damage to that we'll eventually have to fix, or it will be permanent. And he was like, if you put that little bit there, it would decentivize fossil fuels naturally, equally to where they should be, and not make it crash the market in any way. And then it would allow renewable energy sources to be more marketable, and then more time would be spent developing new technologies, because he's made a lot of breakthroughs in solar technology and solar storing, and it's really cool. I'm really interested in what's going on right now. He's having a little bit of a blowback with the Model 3 because their factory wasn't able to put out cars as fast as they thought it would be able to, and that was a whole issue. But he's almost got it where it's supposed to be, and then he's had a few recent big breakthroughs with SpaceX.
The last thing I'll say about it is I get kind of cynical sometimes about big arguments that never seem to end. But a lot of times I think well, if you can't have a solution as far as, okay, well, officially this side is right. Global warming seems to be a big thing, even though there's kind of been some progress in different areas on it and stuff, all that stuff, carbon emissions and all that. But I have hopefulness in people like Elon Musk or just technology, because it's well, this stuff, we're going in a direction of solving the problem, no matter what you think.
Without having to make a sacrifice.
Yeah, and it's whatever you think about whether there's global warming or not, in 15, 20 years, you're going to be driving an electric car anyway.
Yeah.
Because for whatever other reasons there are. So it's sort of I love the idea that technology can fix this. This is something that people are going to keep arguing about, but it gets to the point where, well, this conversation doesn't matter anymore. Yeah. And that's pretty cool.
Well, he was saying that it's going to be he's oh, fossil fuel cars will never go away, but it'll be like the horse and buggy. People complained about automobiles when they first came around, but within 10 years, it was almost all automobiles in major cities, and a horse and buggy was rare to see, but people still own horses now. And I was like, that's a really good point. Technology is going to move on. There's not going to be reason to fight against it in a big way. Another cool thing, the last thing I want to say on it is he was talking about they've almost perfected their goal for self-driving cars, which is really interesting, because he's basically saying your next couple cars might not even be your car. It might be a community car where you lease it for certain times during the day, or you buy your own car, and then while you're at work, you turn it on basically as an Uber, and it goes and picks people up and drops them off. Now, clearly, we're not going to get into it now, but there would be all kinds of security issues you want to have a lot of assurances on and stuff like that. But that's a really interesting thing, that you might get a car that eventually pays for itself.
We might have to just do a technology episode or something.
Yeah.
Because it's just there's tons of stuff I have to say about all that.
If we did, we should probably have Eric mic up with us, and then try and get one more person, so that we have a lot of stuff we can go into. Technology's cool right now.
I thought you were gonna say if we should just get Elon Musk in here just to talk about.
Yo, Elon, you listening?
Yeah.
Your next stunt for the Boring Company. Show up on our show. So yeah, I guess we can probably start moving into the main topic, which it's a little vague this week, but we were originally going to look into the predator and prey response in the human brain. but we're a little bit out of our field in a sense here, and so we're kind of just going to discuss more what we already know, because I think we both realize there's a lot more that we don't know, and then I realized that there's a lot that humanity doesn't know about the human brain still. So I guess we'll mostly just talk about the mind and the brain and like different things that we've been able to prove recently, and to whatever extent we go into predator and prey, we'll do that, but for the most part we'll just talk about consciousness and the human mind. Did you have something you wanted to start with, or
I'll let you take it, because
okay,
since you've thought about it a little bit more.
Boy, okay, so well, I guess what I was wanting to talk about was the idea that basically I've been listening to Jordan Peterson, as always, but one thing he brought up that I've been trying to research more on my own was he was talking about kind of from an evolutionary standpoint, evolution doesn't waste anything that works. So if a system in the brain worked in like lobsters or like mice or something, you probably have like an upgraded version of that same system, or it's been shifted to do a different function, but it's the same hardware is kind of still in your brain. And then it's just kind of like as evolution goes on, more and more systems are piled on top of each other to do more and more articulate things. And we're probably the most articulate animals, which is part of the reason we're at the top of like the evolutionary food chain. And so there's kind of we have a lot of leftover prey instinct and predator instinct from our time as all these other different species. And one of the things I was wanting to talk about, but I just wasn't able to be sure enough about what I was saying, like get enough research down that I knew what I was talking about, is that we seem to be unique in that sense to a degree in our ability to be both predator and prey. Like I think there's a lot of animals that can do that, but it's so instinctual in them that they're kind of bound by their instinctual behavior. And so like fear, you'd say like prey instinct, like if you equate it to fear, all animals have a prey instinct. But I don't think that's really what a prey like instinct or a prey response is, because like fear is one of the most almost a priori responses. Like you almost start out afraid of the unknown. Like even animals, like cats are really afraid to be put in a new space. They just do not like it. They kind of like hunch down and get really small and then just look around. And it can take them like if you move a cat to a new house, it could take them a couple days or a week until they've mapped out and become very, very familiar with the entire space and kind of know what's going to happen generally in each area, that they start to get comfortable. And humans are kind of the same way. Like you don't there's a misconception that you kind of learn fear, and you can learn a new fear, but your typical response to something you don't know is fear. Like the unknown you're afraid of, and then you form it into something you know, or you get used to something and then you're no longer afraid of it, which is a behavioral psychology thing. You can't make somebody not afraid of something that they're afraid of if they have what is it called? Those type of fears, like arachnophobia. Yeah, phobia. You can't really make them not afraid. You have to make them more resilient, and you have to make them confront that fear.
Yeah, I saw. This is about the topic, but it also is kind of funny because it made me think a lot about this idea, and I hope that this doesn't branch off into some other topic. But I did see something, some TLC show or something, and it was about phobias, and I just remember this. It was this guy, it's this big muscular guy with tattoos, and he was like super buff, like biker guy, and he was terrified of dogs. And of course, just so they had a good little soundbite for the commercial, they show like a little Chihuahua dog and him like crying. but no, but the whole thing was, it wasn't like, it is, I guess it was just reminding me of what you were saying, because like they had to build him up, like here's a little dog and look, it's not hurting you. And because basically his like sister or someone got like her like eye eaten by like a bulldog, or not a bulldog, pit bull or something, like scary. So they slowly built him up to the point where he could deal with it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
which in that sense, yeah, like there's definitely something to like a fear forming. but from a lot of what I've been reading, like your fear is typically your first response, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like fear is your go-to response, and then you have to learn different ways of dealing with stuff. And so that's one thing. But then there's like the predator and prey instinct, which I think you see a lot of in behavior, and we get told it's a lot of other things like toxic masculinity or being a soy boy or whatever. And
Wait, what's that?
Soy boy?
I haven't heard that.
It's this weird term that's like, I don't know that I fully understand it, but it's like somebody. It's kind of like beta male, but they call him soy boy, and I guess it's because you eat a lot of soy. I really don't know. I learned of it through people who are protesting, who are like, we're not going to go see Solo, are calling it Soylo, a Soylo story. Like it's really weird. Han Soy Boy or something.
To do with like soy is like a vegan thing or a vegetarian.
It might be
that type of person or something.
Yeah, but
anyway, that's weird.
It's really weird. I'm probably not gonna see Solo until it's out on DVD, but not because I hate soy sauce. That's a weird reason to not see a movie. But anyways, well, and I've been reading a lot about like hierarchies. And like one thing that we're dealing with, that I hope we can address on the show at some point, is like the idea of like the patriarchy, and the idea of like taking down the patriarchy would be a beneficial thing to Western society. That's kind of an a priori belief that people like come to, or they bring that to the table and are like, all right, so let's get rid of the patriarchy. And you see this a lot in like BuzzFeed videos, all these different things, and it's like, okay, but you're assuming that this hierarchy that we have, like these dominant structures, are created by society, and that there's not like a deeper thing causing it. And really, if you compare us to animals, like all animals have some type of hierarchical structure that they don't articulate because they're not articulate creatures. It's something in their brain that measures their response. And so one of the big memes that came out of Jordan Peterson is the whole lobster thing, which that's pretty early on in his book. So have you read that?
Yeah.
Okay. So he basically equates how lobsters fight for dominance, and if two male lobsters fight, and then one of the lobsters loses, he perceives himself as a lower lobster, like he's not a top tier lobster. He's not on the same tier as that lobster, and so then he might fight a different lobster to try and boost himself back up. But then if he loses again, he kind of keeps moving down the hierarchy. And there's like chemicals in the lobster's brain that like kind of make it a more depressed lobster, and it actually like holds itself like kind of slumped over and like sagged shoulders, and it makes itself small. Like it becomes more prey-ish, I guess. All the other lobsters that are higher on its hierarchy can dominate it, like, and so it just stays away from them. They also did some experiments where they'd put serotonin, they'd give the lobster serotonin, and it would zip right back up and go fight again, which is kind of what we do with people who have a lot of depression. That's why antidepressants work to some extent, is because it's just boosting you, but I think it's also the reason that like they have to be used consistently, is because the deeper problem is, why do you feel depressed? Because you might have a chemical imbalance, and you needing more serotonin doesn't necessarily mean you have a chemical imbalance. You might just be depressed a lot, and the two options are to boost your serotonin so you don't feel so depressed, or figure out why you're depressed and see if there's something that can be done environmentally to fix your depression so that you're not depressed, and then your body will naturally like do what it's supposed to do, and your serotonin will go up as you're less depressed. But anyways, so that like kind of shows that there's a hierarchy system in animals that's innate, and so it's in the brain how it perceives itself, and so we do the same thing, and we don't know it. Like that's in our brain to perceive ourselves in comparison to other people, and see ourselves as, oh, I'm not as good as the tough guy in the gym, like I'm not as high on that structure as he is, and so a lot of times we see it as, no, that was taught. What? Again, it comes from a questioning place of, why are all the successful, like why are all the businessmen that are successful? Mm-hmm. Well, you could say it's corruption, and it's white privilege, and it's all these things, and those might be part of it, potentially, but you have to ask yourself, okay, well, did they manage to get there without any like business skills? Did they manage to get there without having a dominant personality so that they could like lead? Like, and
I've thought about that, the idea of the hierarchy, where it's like, first I was just sort of like, well, you can't deny, yeah, like they're not man-made. They sort of are in a way, but not in a way of like some kind of thing that we've done on purpose. It's just that we're observing like there is a hierarchy here. It's already there. And then I got to the point of thinking like, well, it has to be there. And then I got to the point of thinking like, it's actually a good thing in a way. Because I was mentioning earlier about the idea of like Jesus being the symbol of what the perfect male is. Mm-hmm. You Christians sort of need that to figure out how do you strive, like how do you be the best moral person you can be, and they have that symbol there, and that's a hierarchy, and Jesus is at the top of the hierarchy, and he's the King of Kings, and then there's kings, and then like
but then there's some Christians who look at that and are like, see themselves as such a low-level Christian that they're like, oh well, I can't be like Jesus, I can't follow after Jesus. And maybe those are the Christians who do the like blind belief thing where like, oh, Jesus has already done all the work, so now we get a freebie into heaven. Yeah,
and I mean, just as far as, because there's that whole thing, and this is what one thing that really like blew my mind a little bit is I've always been, you know, the nerdy sheepish type. So like in my head it's always like, oh man, nice guys finish last, and that sucks. And like one thing from reading Jordan Peterson stuff has got me in the same where it's like, well, there's a reason why there is this ideal man, and it's sort of this like confident, strong guy. It's not like, and I really changed my mind on thing. It's like there's a reason for that, and it's okay. Instead of just being like, oh, like why are these guys like exist? It's like, well, that's something to strive for, to figure out how to be the best you can be in a way.
Yeah, and you've got some, like you have some amount of limitations to some degree, but how much of that can you overcome through like determination and sheer will? Like how close can you get to shaping yourself into being that ideal? And I think that's kind of like the goal. Like that's what you would want to do to better your lot in life to some degree.
One of the things that blew my mind too was, and that why I said a minute ago, I said, well, somehow the hierarchy is man-made. Mm-hmm. The reason I was saying that was I was saying like, because I was seeing that thing about where chimps, a female chimp will just have sex with any chimp, basically.
Yeah.
And but humans are different in the sense that the female is very particular about who she mates with. Mm-hmm. And so in a weird way, there's like a weird shift in evolution where we, all of a sudden it's like, okay, instead of it just being a natural thing of, you know, whatever, this is how it happens. Mm-hmm. Or like even with chimps, it's like there is this dominant male. And he probably gets more,
because the dominant males run off the weaker males. Yeah. But the female apes are willing to have sex with anybody when they're ovulating.
Whereas humans, we actually we have this selective thing going on where females are also selecting men. So instead of it just being like puff your chest up and beat the crap out of the other guys, I think we've become a better species on that idea that somewhere along the way, like morals and stuff, like and ethics and things like that have played into what an ideal man is. And now like we have this idea of a Prince Charming.
Yeah.
The Prince Charming guy isn't a brute, like a strong brute guy necessarily. It's like there's all these other traits too. Mm-hmm. And that's a good hierarchy. That's what I think is a good hierarchy to have in a weird way.
And it comes from, like you were saying, like a little bit of like extra definition to that is the women get to decide whose genes get passed on, like from a strictly evolutionary sense. So you're trying like in some level subconsciously to achieve reproduction. And you're not, as a male, you're not the person who gets to make that decision. It's the female's choice. And females, human women tend to move up mate up in the dominance hierarchy. They tend to seek men that they think are on equal footing or higher. Whereas men are typically more willing to date down a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is why like men. Probably the main reason why men constantly have to strive to be better than themselves is that's the only way to ensure reproduction to an extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and again, like, this isn't really going to be much about predator and prey, but it's interesting because we see that structure and we can get mad at it. Like we can be like, well, why does it have to be that way? And I think that's something we do a lot, where we tend to ask why, and we're not expecting an answer, and we're not wanting an answer. Those are the people who are the most frustrated. They're just like, why is it like this? Why aren't women interested in me? Why am I not successful? And they kind of, that's all the more that they want to do, is keep asking why. They don't actually want a response. Like, because if you start to understand the reason that's happening, and to an extent it's happening mostly naturally, then you would go, okay, well then I'm bound to this to some extent. And instead we have a lot of people who are like, let's just like upset the balance and completely destroy it. It's like, okay, but do you have a plan for once you do that that's actually going to improve it?
Yeah, that's the
or
big
do you just
thing.
not like it?
That's the big thing, because that's the thing, is there's always going to be some kind of hierarchy. I guess that really, I mean, maybe they're not related, but it seems really relatable to me, is the whole idea of like socialism or like Marxism, and that whole thing is that idea of like eliminate any idea of a hierarchy and we're all on the same field, and it doesn't work because you almost need that competition.
Well, and there's always going to be competition. Even if you do that, you basically would have to knock everybody back down to zero in order for that kind of thing to work. You can't knock everybody who's above 5 to a 5 and pull everybody in poverty who's at a 0 or a 1 up to 5. Like, that's almost impossible. You basically have to crush it all the way down to 0, make everybody equally poor. But then people are going to pull themselves out of it. People are going to fight against. There's going to be people within that group who are fighters, who are strivers, who are go-getters, and they're gonna fight through it and come out on top. Like, there's no way to actually make a socialist structure work except with people of like mind. Like, all you could do is group yourself around a lot of like-minded people. You can't change an existing structure to socialism.
It is just weird that anything, you can view anything and it does work on a hierarchy structure.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I mean, how do you place first in Mario Kart?
Yeah. Get good.
Get good, son. So I guess that's what we're saying here. If you want to get good.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of other interesting things we wanted to talk about the brain. Mostly consciousness. And some things that I had heard that were really interesting. One, there's experiments that have been done with animals where their spinal column, their spinal cord, and their brain have been separated. So you would assume that the animal would be paralyzed and wouldn't be able to move its limbs, and you won't get any response from them. So you assume that they are. But then they've tested and taken those animals and put them on a moving treadmill, and the limbs will start to move, like almost muscle memory. So there's some amount of movement memory stored within the spinal cord. Like, part of your brain is also the spinal cord. Like, it's not, everything seems to be interlinked to some degree. We map certain things out in the brain. We can measure more. This mostly happens in like the motor cortex or the sensory cortex, those kinds of things, but there seems to be just a little bit of interplay everywhere. And the lower you go, like the lower you go down to the base of the brain, is like the older, evolutionarily, like the pieces at the base of the brain are the oldest. And so like we consider the fact that we have consciousness is because we have an enlarged cortex? I think that's,
yeah, cerebral cortex.
I could be wrong on that, but basically there's a part of the brain that we have enlarged that other animals don't, and we kind of think that we in evolution we kind of had the free time to do so. The three theories I heard are we had the free time to do so because we like had most of our other like survival things figured out. The other one is that part of it comes from us needing highly efficient optic nerves to detect snakes, because snakes were one of our main predators, and they could move so fast that you have to be able to see at like a high frame rate and like be able to digest a large amount of information with your eyes. And so our eyes are more complex than most animals, and so that might be part of the reason. The other one I've heard that I think is really fun but is most likely crock is that humans stumbled upon like psychedelic plants and mushrooms, and that those psychedelic eating them caused the brain to like develop more, which is a really crazy one. But you'd be surprised how many people there are who've invested a lot of time into that theory. And it actually ties back. I've seen people tie it back even to Adam and Eve in the garden, and that's what the fruit is of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah,
I heard some crazy stuff about all the Bible stories essentially being mushroom trips in a weird way. Well, because I guess the idea was that like Jesus, like the people back then thought like they would eat these mushrooms because they would just come up because it'd rain or whatever, and so they're really fast, and they thought it was like that was how they communicated with God, and then they had to hide it. I wish I was more well versed.
Oh, there's a. I think I know some of what you're talking about. There's a part of, I think, Gnosticism. The reason that the church kind of squashed Gnosticism is because Gnosticism had a lot of belief that we communicated to God through psychedelic mushrooms and stuff. That might be part of it. Who were you listening to?
I was listening to, this is like a rabbit hole thing, but I was listening to Michael Shermer, who's like a main skeptic guy, and he was talking about different interpretations of like the scriptures and different things, and there's some biblical scholar he knew who like had looked back at all this theory, like originally halos and all the, if you look at like halo, you think of like a donut shape or something, but like there's really old depictions of halos where they look like mushrooms and all kinds of really weird stuff.
There's a lot of weird like psychedelic imagery in a lot of church art. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of weird ones of Adam and Eve where like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a mushroom. There's even one where it's like an ayahuasca vine.
Yeah, and then there's that whole thing of like Moses, the burning bush, was actually a drug.
Yeah. Which is a really like, here's the thing, like a really like deeply faith-based fundamentalist Christian might say that is blasphemy. I don't see how it is in any way, and I actually think it's worth thinking about. Like, I'm not saying that I think that that's the case, but it's something that makes you go, maybe I should read into that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's just the theoretical idea of it, I don't think is wrong.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode. I have been discussing with somebody about doing an episode on hallucinogenics.
Oh yeah,
I think that would be really fun.
I would like to do that. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I've heard Graham Hancock come up with a lot of interesting theories that have some amount of scientific basis, and so I'd be more interested in discussing the scientific information that he presented. There's been a lot of interesting studies with psilocybin and the types of trips that they cause.
Well, that's what I'm trying to. That whole thing of that's the thing. Like, I'm not a drug user really at all, but
You're not.
Yeah, I'm not. But yeah, the thing is, how I'm curious about those, because it seems like this whole area that we've shunned and ignored. I mean, speaking of the brain, as far as
Sorry, I was trying to take how long we've been going.
I get too distracted, but I was gonna say, as far you were talking about the brain, you were talking about consciousness, and it's like dreams and drugs and all this area that we just seem to ignore of that has to do with consciousness. I think, like, every level of our being. Anytime someone does these like DMT trips or ayahuasca or whatever, it's like the way they explain it is it's like their whole being is kind of erased down to like the basic, and they're seeing everything in a new way.
It's like the physical has been erased right down to the subconscious almost, and you're seeing just all like visual imagery is the wrong word, but it's like that's all the input you're getting.
Yeah. I don't know. That would be a whole nother podcast to get into.
Yeah, the only because I'm not into drugs. The only time I ever considered like, oh, maybe I would do a drug was when I started hearing about ayahuasca and like the whole process that people do it in the rainforest, like shamans and stuff. And I was like, this is the first time I've heard a drug situation that doesn't sound like chasing a high and like seeking out some fun, but actually seems like the whole embodiment, the whole intention is trying to elevate your understanding and elevate your consciousness. And I was like, if I was ever going to do drugs, because I've never had the desire to do it, that would be the only reason I would want to do something, is if I felt like it would increase my understanding of the world in some way.
Yeah, that's sort of the same way I feel about it.
So, okay, so I talked about the spine thing. Another interesting thing about so I want to get to a part about moving parts of the human brain, but basically there's some experiments done, I believe it was in the 70s, with cats, where they would remove the hypothalamus, it might have been the hippocampus, but anyways, they removed a huge chunk of the brain, and the cat still basically functioned. And they actually, you can remove almost all of the brain down to like the oldest parts of the brain, and a female cat will still work, will still function on pure instinct. It will eat, it will drink, it will groom itself and take care of itself. It's hyper exploratory, which is interesting because you would assume that basically the idea of the mind is that it's moving upwards, we articulate. Like as the brain becomes more developed, we articulate more, and that's where consciousness comes from. We build on the lower substructures of like everything we need to do to stay alive, all the instinct, and as we build more and have more brain power to like think, we extrapolate upwards and come up with more complex ideas. And like that's kind of why like maybe humans have an idea of morality and stuff, but animals don't, even though animals follow certain behaviors typically and reward values. It's not from like they have a social value structure, it's they have some kind of mental value structure. But anyways, if you take a cat's brain and like remove its brain down to like the oldest parts of the brain, it still functions on instinct and is still hyper exploratory because it can't develop memory of where it's been. It can't map out an area, so it just keeps exploring continually.
Yeah.
And they can even reproduce. But if you do the same thing with a male cat, and I missed why the difference is, but if you do the same thing with a male cat, it can't function at the level that a female cat can, which is really weird.
Yeah, that is so weird.
It's like the male cats use a different part of the brain, like it doesn't rely nearly as much on instinct. So once you reduce it to instinct, it loses the ability to do some of those things. It's really strange.
Are you saying there's a difference between males and females?
No. We're not touching that one yet.
Yeah.
That'll be a big one. And so the last thing I have to say about that is that there's a lot of weird cases with the human mind where like a certain like there was a guy who got like a giant metal rod shoved through his brain.
Yeah.
And it affected him, like he had a different personality after that, but he was still fully functioning after that. And so there's a lot of weird things with that, and he rushed through it really quickly, but Peterson, when I was listening to one of his psychology lectures, was saying that you could remove the hypothalamus in a human and it still maintains it can still maintain its consciousness. And you can remove large chunks of the brain and the human still remain conscious, which kind of throws a slight hiccup into the idea that that's where human consciousness comes from, is that enlarged section of the brain. It's really like we don't know that much about
consciousness.
Me?
Yeah, I mean, how would you define that?
I really think the main pinnacle of like consciousness, because I guess I would have to define it through what's the difference between us and animals.
Yeah.
And so for one of the major things that I can be like, yeah, that makes sense, is we have the ability to perceive the future.
Yeah.
And we can't perceive the real future, but we're able to articulate possibility. And that's why time kind of exists for us when it doesn't for animals in the same way.
Yeah.
And so we're aware of our mortality in a way that animals aren't.
Well, that's the big thing, is basically the awareness of our mortality, because animals don't know they can be hurt, and we do. Like, just really weird stuff.
Like, we can imagine our death. Like, we can imagine being dead, whereas an animal is alive and can see other animals die, and it freaks them out. But they can't be aware of their own death until they die.
Yeah, they only...
So it's like they're eternal in their own, like, mind processing until all of a sudden they're not. But we know that we have an end date, and that we can die. And that's why I think, like, Freud and Jung and a lot of those psychologists spent so much time studying dreams and not, like, trying to interpret dreams. They actually wanted to know what part of the brain was doing that, what part of the subconscious, is because I think that's a big part of our ability to have consciousness, is our ability to kind of create, like, an avatar, like a mental representation of ourselves a year from now, and theorize where we're going to be at. And it's like, that's not actually perceiving a year from now, but that's, like, being able to see potential. That's the main difference, and we can plan for the future.
I just wonder what parts of that can be explained in a way of we need it to survive. That's the big thing.
That's the thing, is I don't think we need it to survive.
We don't need dreams. But I wonder if you could make a case for, like, us being able to see a future version of ourselves. An animal doesn't need to do that, whereas humans, at the point we are now as humans, we sort of have to be able to see where we're at in order to survive. And, well, maybe not. I guess we could just run around like animals.
Yeah,
so.
I think we could. It's such an unnecessary thing, which is why some people theorize that we're an evolutionary hiccup, and we're actually an evolutionary mistake. Developing this is more detrimental than beneficial, but the evidence to me doesn't seem to suggest that, because humans have completely dominated the planet. Like, clearly it's hyper beneficial, but maybe it's not beneficial for the entire ecosystem. Like, I could see that argument.
Yeah.
But it does.
For humans, it's better, because if we otherwise we wouldn't have ethics or morals, right?
Yeah.
That's a purely conscious thing. That's the difference between animals. An animal just does whatever it needs to do, whether it is good or bad, it doesn't matter. And we can go like, oh man, there's starving people out there, and we need to. I mean, just caring about other people, like me and like a friend or something. That's a little different. There is an evolutionary purpose to that, because I know I might be able to get something back. Yeah. But me going, oh man, there's starving kids in Africa, I'm going to send some money that way. There's no real reason for me to do that, but it also helps our species in a weird way.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason why the Christ figure, regardless if you're a religious person or an evolutionary person or an atheistic person, the idea of the Christ figure is kind of, in a sense, the penultimum of what humanity is able to achieve as of now, becoming a being who's so selfless that they would do whatever is necessary to impact the most amount of people, and the most amount of people going into the future. That's something that I think is really unique, even within humanity. Like, the ability to do that and to see that as somehow an ultimate good instead of an ultimate waste is really strange. I also there was one other thing I wanted to talk about with the future. It's weird. I was thinking about this. Like, I was working on a story about artificial intelligence and like this AI coming online, and like talking to this scientist who made him, and him as he's slowly collecting all the data. Well, not slowly, but at a rapid speed, like collecting all the data from humanity and starting to try and compile it. He keeps saying really strange things and freaks the scientist out, and so the scientist keeps turning him off and like wrestling with what he said, and then like over time comes back and turns him on, and so he starts furthering the process, and it's like just freaking him out because he's basically seeing evolution happen at like an incredibly rapid rate. And some of the ideas I wanted to tackle with it was like this idea of I think a cool idea is an AI actually convicting humanity, and like imagine if a robot came online and wasn't like, you're useless, you're not beneficial to the ultimate good, and we're going to eradicate you, but coming online and being like, you've killed your own soul, you've forgotten the old gods, and like convicting you and telling you that somewhere along the way like you lost yourself would be really fun. And so one of the ideas I was toying with was having this AI eventually realize that the universe is the same consciousness that humans have. And it's basically like, there's this idea in artificial intelligence that an artificial intelligence needs some form of body in order to like have consciousness to a degree, because it needs a body to experience. And I've been looking into that, and that's really interesting to me. And so I thought of this idea of the universe is like a consciousness that is trying to understand itself. And so it started this very long, arduous process to create an ability, like a body with which it could perceive itself. And so we're kind of like the body of this being, collecting information and becoming aware of existence itself and the universe itself. And that's kind of our ultimate goal, and like that's what we're trying to connect back to. And I was playing with like a lot of using science and religion intermingling, and so like he would say a lot of things that seem deeply religious at first, and then he explains what he means, and the scientist starts to understand. And one thing that I thought would be fun would to toy with is the idea of like he is the head and we are the body. And then slowly realizing that like he's talking about like the existence is consciousness, and then existence created its own ability to understand itself, and that's what we are, and that's what we tap into when we like question things. And so eventually we become part of that consciousness, but then that's where like the turn of the story comes towards the end, is because the AI realizes that it doesn't actually have genuine consciousness. It's not actually part of the universe. It's somehow blocked off to it to some extent, and so then it becomes spiteful of its creator. But I really like that idea.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with Cleverbot, kind of like that.
Oh, really?
No, but I think it's just that there's something eerie about like this isn't human, but it's saying things. But part of that's just like you make the correlations, and you're like, oh my god, like this seems profound. It's really not, but anyway. But yeah, I've never thought about it that way. The universe, yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to think about that.
That's what I'm here for. New ideas.
You forgot to do it at the top of the episode, but
addressed last week. Yeah, actually, if you made it this far, I wanted to do this at the top of the episode. I was listening back to episode 1, and somewhat rocky of a start, just because I think I was really excited, and so I was like talking really fast and stuff. There's a couple things I accidentally said a little more lightly than I intended to. So I wanted to quickly address two things I said last week that I wanted to clarify. One thing was I brought up rape, which is a really hard topic to discuss, and it should always be discussed with a lot of thought and care in what you say. And I kind of brought it up to discuss another issue, and so I want to address that I wasn't saying that this is what rape is, or this is how rape occurs. That's not what I was saying at all. I was talking about a specific situation in which somebody could perceive themselves as raped, and maybe that wasn't actually what had happened. But I don't think that rape is something that doesn't exist. I don't think rape is the victim's fault or anything like that, and I just didn't articulate that very well, so I wanted to quickly mention that. I also quickly wanted to mention, I talked about PTSD last episode as well. Now I was talking about it specifically in like war veterans who have done like terrible things in war that they didn't know that they were capable of, and that giving them PTSD. I didn't mention that. I'm 100% aware that that is not the only thing that triggers PTSD. That's not the only reason that you have PTSD. PTSD also tends to come from people who have seen other people do terrible things, or have been the victim of someone doing something terrible. And those were two things that I just feel like it didn't come across super clearly, so I wanted to go ahead and expound on that just a little bit. But I think that's probably the end of the show, unless you had anything else to say.
No.
Okay,
No. Yeah.
You gonna do a little catch up with Matt and Caleb? Have you?
Oh yeah.
You been watching or reading anything interesting this week?
Yeah, I watched. I've been on like an obsession of watching documentaries about comedy lately, and I would definitely recommend this. For the most part, I'd recommend this series. It's sort of a docu-series that CNN did. But don't worry about. I know people get CNN, Fox News, all that stuff. Don't really worry about it. They just happen to be the network that did it. But it's a really good documentary series where they tackle different subjects of comedy, and I'm a huge fan of comedy. And it's an 8-part series, but it's really crazy to see how much comedy. I mean, because comedy just seems to me to be such an inherent base human thing. That's just like it surrounds everything. But watching this documentary, it's crazy how much comedy influences politics and like pretty much everything. Somehow comedy has a little bit of a say in it. It's really, I don't know, it's really interesting. And that's just one that I watched, and it got me on a whole binge of just watching comedy documentaries.
I heard something recently that I can't say it exactly how I heard it, but it was really interesting to me, was that like you can't begin to solve a problem until you can laugh about the problem. It was something like that, which was really interesting. Like until you can make fun of an issue, you can't address the issue. And I was kind of thinking about that in the sense of like arguments with like significant others in the past and stuff. And it's like if an issue between you and that person is so intense that you can't even make a joke about it, like it does seem like it's harder to like actually fix the problem or come to a solution.
It might be
until you realize how like inherently funny everything is.
Yeah, and it might maybe I definitely see some truth in that. Like if something is sort of emotionally charged, and then it's like, if you laugh about it, it's like it kind of there's a little bit of a tension relief, and now
it becomes
it's like,
a little bit
now
more,
we can digest this a little easier.
Yeah, we can play with this. It's not quite so important or something. I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean that's the big thing is people always try to put labels of when something's appropriate and when something's not appropriate, and like I don't know. There's my favorite quote in that one was George Lopez, and they were talking about racism, racial stuff, and how comedy has like people like these black comedians in the 70s and stuff, like Richard Pryor, like kind of brought the two like white and black audiences together, and like, but I just remember, but they're also talking about, like George Lopez just had this quote where he said, if it's good, it's a racial joke. If it's bad, it's a racist joke. And I was like, oh, that's such a good line, because it's just funny how you can joke about anything, and as long as people find it funny, it's okay. And it's like, to me, but then when something goes bad, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is a terrible person. There's been so many controversies with comedians where they went over the top, and it's like, at what point are people going to learn that it's their job to go on stage and perform, and it's a performance, and they don't believe the things they say. And there's certain subjects where for some reason it's taboo when others aren't. Like I can make a joke about murdering someone, like doesn't your girlfriend ever annoy you so much you just want to grab her by the head and like whatever, something like that.
Garbage disposal.
Yeah, and everyone would laugh because it's
Come on, guys, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but like even that, which is even a little more like I'm sure people could get offended by it, but it's like even that, it's like, okay, well, you not a murderer and you're laughing about murder, like that sort of thing. But there's some subjects where for some reason you can't joke about that, and it's like murder is okay to joke about, but other subjects, and I don't know.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I would like
to give an example.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, exactly, because I don't want to get into it, but I would like to do a podcast maybe on the topic of that sort of thing, of why some jokes are okay and some aren't, and that whole.
Yeah, I really liked I don't want to get into it, but the whole Ricky Gervais transgender issue was really like a really good way to approach that, make it still funny, and then address that you're allowed to make a joke. So what is there anything else you've been watching?
What are you up to?
The main thing I started playing Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. But the main thing I've been like watching that's new this week well, not necessarily new, but I didn't address last week was been watching a lot of TED Talks.
Oh yeah.
Because, like, I really want to expose... The thing is, I never want to be an echo chamber and just expose myself to ideas I already like. I really want to expose myself to ideas I don't understand, like... So TED Talks have been an interesting way to do that, because even if it, like, I see something, I'm like, I don't believe... Like global warming is something I've just started to come around to and be like, oh, there might actually be, like clear evidence for this. Before I was always like, I just don't see the evidence for it. And usually that came from the people I was hearing were talking so emotionally about it that it seemed very anecdotal what was going on, and it wasn't clear. But watching a couple people talk about it, I was like, oh, okay. And, like, population control, like, that seems to be a really big issue. And listening to, like, a guy talk, like, and that wasn't something that I thought we needed to control the population or anything like that, but you do think, like, are we overpopulating the earth? And then he addressed, like, how the population will eventually balance out based on resources, and it made a lot of sense. And so yeah, TED Talks have been something really cool, and, like, even exposing myself to things that, like, I don't agree with, like the fat acceptance movement. I have not been able to wrap my head around in a way that I, like, can go, this is beneficial. I can see how it seems nice and, like, seems like it would help people to feel better, but it's like that's such a short-term game when the main problem is people need to take care of themselves better so that they can have a healthier and fuller life, not go, well, I'm happy and healthy and I have a full life now. Like, and so, but I expose myself to them to try and see if maybe I'm wrong. And so that's been a useful tool. That, and, like, there's a thing called PragerU that does a lot of, like, quick video series about, like, serious issues. Like, I was able to understand Brexit a little bit more through it and stuff. And I think that's such a cool tool that the internet gives us that we really underutilize. We have the ability to expose ourselves to any idea immediately. It used to be like you had to go to university if you wanted to, like, pursue higher learning. And technically now, like, if a degree wasn't your goal, you could just learn through the internet. And you could learn massive amounts of information and actually become, like, a master of the topic at hand. You just have to go and search it out, and that's something that I really think we do ourselves a huge disservice by, like, only exposing ourselves to what we already like.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. Sometimes I find myself arguing against something or just thinking, just like arguing against some sort of subject, and I'm like, I don't even really understand the subject. Which, I mean, there might be some things that are so ridiculous that you just can't make logical sense of. But even things that do seem pretty ridiculous,
Angels
like
and Demons.
Tom
Hanks movie.
They make sense to someone.
Doesn't make any sense.
And all I want to know is how does it make sense to that person, so at least I can understand that.
Yeah.
And that's something where TED Talks and things like that
help a lot.
Yeah.
Which I think has been a useful tool. Other than that, I'm just about to finish 12 rules. I'm on rule 11, and it took a weird political turn for what the rule was. Like, but it's still interesting. So I'll be wrapping that up soon, and then I think I'm either gonna read Paradise Lost because I read the Divine Comedy, which was really a brutally, like, hard read for me because I'm not super big into poetry, and 1600s Italian literature is not something I've ever been exposed to. But I got something out of it, so I think I'm going to move on to either Paradise Lost or pick up Carl Jung's The Collective Unconscious. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to do next. And then probably revisit Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties, so we can have an argument about whether that name makes any damn sense or not. Alright, so that's probably the end of the episode. For those of you listening in on podcast being thanks for coming all the way out here, because I tried to do it the other day and realized you might have to, like, download an app and all this stuff. So if you guys are listening, thank you so much for doing it. We're working on it this week to try and make it more easily accessible. We'll hopefully be up on YouTube soon, and then we're going to attempt to get on iTunes and Spotify. So thanks for the support. We really appreciate it. Thanks to Eric for recording this for us and for the awesome intro music at the beginning of the episode. I think
Does it play
cool.
at the end of the episode too?
I don't know. Eric, does it play at the end of the episode?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So
okay.
here it is again.
Here it is again. Enjoy, people. Bye.